My name is Evelyn Carter, and if you're listening to this story, it's because I need you to understand what really happened that December night when my world turned upside down. I'm 68 years old now, and my hands shake a little when I hold my coffee cup in the mornings, but my memory is crystal clear about every detail of that evening, every word, every look, every moment that led to the point where I had to choose between my dignity and my family. I need to start from the beginning, though, because you can't understand what happened without knowing who I was before that night. You need to know about the woman who spent 43 years of her life in the same small apartment on Maple Street in Brooklyn, the woman who raised a son alone, the woman who believed that love and sacrifice were the same thing. It was 1978 when Robert Carter died. I was 26 years old. Jason was only 3, and the world felt like it had collapsed around me. Robert wasn't a wealthy man. He worked at the docks, came home with calloused hands and tired eyes, but he loved us fiercely. When the heart attack took him away, I found myself alone with a toddler and exactly $347 in our savings account. I remember counting those bills over and over again, sitting at our small kitchen table while Jason slept, wondering how I was going to make it work. The apartment we lived in was tiny, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, and a living room that doubled as Jason's playroom. The walls were painted a faded yellow that had once been cheerful but had dulled over the years. The radiator made strange noises in the winter, and the windows facing the courtyard let in just enough light to make the dust particles dance in the afternoon sun. But it was ours. It was home. I got my first job at Rosenberg's tailoring shop 3 blocks away from our apartment. Mrs. Rosenberg was a stern woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, but she had a soft heart. When I came to her with Jason in tow, explaining that I needed work and could sew well, she looked at my son's worn shoes and my nervous hands and said, "You start Monday. Bring the boy. He can play in the back room." Those early years blur together in my memory like watercolors in the rain. I would wake up at 5:30 every morning, make breakfast for Jason, dress him in whatever clean clothes we had, and walk him to Mrs. Murphy's apartment 2 floors down. She watched him for $1 a day, money I could barely afford but had to spend. Then I'd rush to Rosenberg's, spend 8 hours hunched over a sewing machine, pick up Jason, make dinner, help him with whatever simple homework a 4 or 5-year-old could have, put him to bed, and then sit at my own kitchen table to do piecework until midnight. The piecework was what kept us afloat. Mrs. Rosenberg would give me bundles of fabric to take home, hems to fix, buttons to sew, simple alterations that I could do while Jason slept. My fingers would be sore and stiff by morning, and I'd smell like the oil from the sewing machine. But those extra $5 or $10 a week meant Jason could have new shoes when he outgrew his old ones, or a book from the corner store, or a candy bar on Friday afternoons. I remember one particular winter when Jason was about 6. It was 1981, and the cold that year was brutal. Our radiator had been acting up for weeks, barely putting out enough heat to warm the living room, let alone the bedrooms. I'd called the landlord, Mr. Petrov, multiple times, but he kept saying he'd get to it next week. Next week turned into next month, and Jason started sleeping in my bed because his room was too cold. One night, I woke up to find him shivering beside me, his lips almost blue. I pulled every blanket we owned over him and held him close, but I could feel how cold his little body was. The next morning, I marched down to Mr. Petrov's office and told him that if he didn't fix our heat within 24 hours, I would call the city and report the building. I'd never spoken to him like that before. I was usually quiet and polite, afraid to make waves because we needed the apartment and I couldn't afford to move. Mr. Petrov looked surprised, maybe even a little impressed. He fixed the radiator that same day. That was the first time I realized that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when you're scared. I wish I'd remembered that lesson better in later years. As Jason grew older, I started working a second job on weekends at a dry cleaner's on Atlantic Avenue. It meant I was away from home more, but it also meant I could start saving small amounts of money for his future. I had this vision of him going to college, becoming something more than his father and I ever could be. I wanted him to wear suits instead of work clothes, to use his mind instead of his hands, to never have to worry about having enough money for heat in the winter. Every dollar I saved felt like a victory. I kept the money in an old coffee can hidden behind the flour in our kitchen cabinet. Jason never knew about it, but sometimes when he was at school, I'd count those crumpled bills and imagine him walking across a stage in a cap and gown, diploma in hand, proud smile on his face. That image kept me going through the long nights of sewing and the early mornings when I could barely keep my eyes open. The neighborhood we lived in was changing during those years. When Robert and I first moved to Maple Street, it was mostly families like us, working-class people who looked out for each other. Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 4B would bring us homemade soup when Jason was sick. Mr. and Mrs. Chen from the first floor would slip candy into Jason's pockets when we passed them in the hallway. It felt like a community. But by the mid-1980s, things started shifting. Young professionals began moving in, paying higher rents for renovated apartments. Some of the older families moved out, priced out by landlords who realized they could make more money from tenants with better jobs. I watched nervously as our building slowly changed, wondering if we'd be next to go. Jason was 12 when I realized he was embarrassed by our apartment. He'd started bringing friends home less often, and when he did, I'd notice him apologizing for things. The size of his room, the old furniture, the way the bathroom door didn't close properly. One day, I overheard him on the phone with a classmate, saying he couldn't have a birthday party because our place is too small. My heart broke that day. I sat in our tiny kitchen after he went to bed and cried quietly, wondering if all my sacrifices were worth it if my son was ashamed of the life I'd built for us. But then I looked around at our small apartment, at the photos of Jason's school achievements taped to the refrigerator, at the books piled on every surface because he loved to read, at the small dining table where we'd shared thousands of meals together, and I realized something important. This wasn't just a place where we lived. This was the foundation of everything. Every meal I'd cooked here, every story I'd read to him on the old couch, every night I'd stayed up sewing to pay our bills. It had all been building toward something. Maybe our apartment was small, but the love inside it was enormous. Jason did go to college, just like I'd dreamed. He got a scholarship to study business at NYU. Not a full ride, but enough that with my coffee and savings and some student loans, we could make it work. The day I drove him to his dorm in our old Honda Civic, I felt like I was living in a miracle. My son, the little boy who used to play in the back room of a tailor shop while I worked, was going to get the education I'd never had. He called me every Sunday during his freshman year. We'd talk for an hour about his classes, his friends, the city he was discovering. He sounded so grown up, so confident, so different from the shy boy who used to be embarrassed by our small apartment. I was proud of him, but I also felt a strange sadness, like I was watching him move away from me in more ways than just geography. It was during his sophomore year that he started talking about a girl named Ashley. Ashley Miller from Connecticut, whose father was some kind of executive. She was studying art history, lived in one of the nicer dorms, spoke with the kind of accent that made everything sound sophisticated. Jason was clearly smitten. I could hear it in his voice when he mentioned her name, the way he'd casually work her into every conversation. The first time he brought her home was during spring break of his junior year. I'd cleaned our apartment from top to bottom, bought groceries I normally couldn't afford, even splurged on flowers for the kitchen table. I wanted to make a good impression, wanted her to see that even though we didn't have much money, we had love and dignity and a real home. Ashley was beautiful in the way that magazines taught girls to be beautiful. Perfectly straight blonde hair, clothes that looked expensive but casual, the kind of effortless elegance that actually required a lot of effort and money. She smiled when Jason introduced us, but I noticed how her eyes moved around our small living room, taking inventory of our old furniture, our small television, the way the afternoon light revealed every crack in the paint. "It's so cozy," she said, which I knew was polite speak for small. We had dinner at my little kitchen table, the same table where I'd done piecework for years, where Jason had done his homework, where we'd shared thousands of conversations. I'd made my best meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from a can that I'd doctored up with butter and almonds. Ashley picked at her food and talked about her internship at an art gallery in Manhattan, her semester abroad in Italy, her family's house in the Hamptons. Jason hung on her every word. I watched him watching her, and realized that she represented everything he thought he wanted: sophistication, class, a life that was bigger and brighter than the one I'd given him. I should have been happy that he was ambitious, that he wanted more than what he'd grown up with. But sitting there, listening to Ashley's stories about wine tastings and art exhibitions, I felt small and inadequate in a way I hadn't felt in years. After they left to go back to school, I sat in my kitchen and looked around at the apartment that had been my whole world for so long. For the first time in years, I saw it through someone else's eyes, through Ashley's eyes. The faded wallpaper, the mismatched furniture, the way everything looked tired and worn. I saw a woman in her 40s who worked 2 jobs and lived in a tiny apartment and had rough hands from years of sewing. I went to bed that night wondering if I'd somehow failed Jason by not giving him more. But then I remembered all the nights I'd stayed up to make sure he had everything he needed, all the times I'd chosen his happiness over my own comfort, all the love I'd poured into raising him. That had to count for something. That had to be enough. I was wrong about that, but I wouldn't find out how wrong until many years later, on a cold December night when my son's wife would look me in the eye and tell me I didn't belong in the house I'd helped build with my sacrifices. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, you need to understand how we got from that hopeful spring afternoon to the moment when my world fell apart. You need to know about the wedding, about the early years of Jason and Ashley's marriage, about all the small ways I slowly began to disappear from my son's life without even realizing it was happening. You need to understand who I was before I became the woman who finally found her voice in the darkness of that December night. Jason graduated from NYU in May of 2001, and I'll never forget the pride I felt watching him walk across that stage. There I was, sitting in the audience at Madison Square Garden, surrounded by families who looked like they belonged in magazine spreads, and my son, my baby boy, was getting his bachelor's degree in business administration. I wore the nicest dress I owned, a navy blue one I'd bought on sale at Macy's 3 years earlier, and I'd gotten my hair done at the salon for the first time in months. I wanted to look worthy of being Jason Carter's mother. Ashley's parents were there too, of course. Richard and Patricia Miller from Greenwich, Connecticut. Richard was tall and distinguished looking, with silver hair and the kind of confident handshake that spoke of boardroom meetings and country club memberships. Patricia was elegant in that effortless way that comes from never having to worry about money, perfectly coordinated outfit, expensive handbag, the kind of jewelry that whispers rather than shouts. They were polite to me, but I could feel the distance in their smiles, the way they looked just over my shoulder when we talked, as if they were searching for someone more interesting to speak with. "You must be so proud," Patricia said to me after the ceremony, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant she was saying the right thing rather than feeling it. "I am," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "He's worked so hard for this." "Well," Richard interjected, checking his expensive watch, "now the real work begins. Jason's got tremendous potential. With the right opportunities, the right connections, he could really make something of himself." The implication hung in the air like smoke. With their help, not mine. I'd gotten Jason this far, but now he needed people like them to take him the rest of the way. After graduation, Jason moved back home with me for a few months while he looked for work. It was wonderful having him there again, even though he was different now, more polished, more confident, but somehow less mine. He'd sleep until noon, spend hours on his laptop applying for jobs, take calls from friends I'd never met. Ashley would come over 2 or 3 times a week, and the 2 of them would sit at my kitchen table making plans for their future while I made them sandwiches and tried not to feel like a waitress in my own home. They talked about Manhattan apartments, about entry-level positions at prestigious companies, about networking events and career trajectories. I'd listen from the kitchen, washing dishes or folding laundry, feeling proud and lost at the same time. This was what I'd wanted for Jason, a bigger life, better opportunities. But I was beginning to understand that a bigger life might not have room for the woman who'd raised him in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. Jason got his first real job in September, as a junior analyst at a financial services firm in Midtown. The salary seemed enormous to me, more than I made in a year working both my jobs. But Ashley wrinkled her nose when he told us the number. "It's just a starting position," she said, as if she were reassuring herself. "You'll move up quickly. My father knows people at Goldman Sachs, maybe in a year or 2. I watched Jason's face during these conversations. He wanted to please her so badly, wanted to be worthy of her vision of him. I recognized the look because I'd worn it myself for years, the expression of someone trying to prove they belonged in a world that felt just out of reach. The engagement happened the following Christmas. Jason brought me a ring to show me before he proposed, a diamond solitaire that cost more than my rent for 6 months. I held it up to the light in my kitchen, watching it sparkle, and tried to feel happy instead of terrified. "She's going to love it," I told him, and she did. Ashley cried when he proposed, and the photos they posted on Facebook showed her elegant hand extended toward the camera, the ring catching the restaurant's soft lighting perfectly. The wedding planning began immediately, and I quickly learned that my role would be peripheral. Patricia took charge with the efficiency of a military general, booking venues and caterers, interviewing photographers, compiling guest lists. Ashley would call me occasionally to update me on their progress, but it felt more like she was being polite than actually including me. "We're thinking about the Riverside Country Club for the reception," she'd say. "It's where my parents were married, where my grandmother was married. It's sort of a family tradition." I wanted to ask where I fit into these family traditions, but I didn't. Instead, I offered to help however I could, which usually meant small tasks that kept me busy but not involved, addressing invitations, assembling wedding favors, calling to confirm RSVPs. The dress shopping was particularly painful. Ashley invited me to join her and her mother and sister at a bridal boutique in Manhattan, and I took the day off from work to be there. The shop was all white marble and crystal chandeliers, with gowns that cost more than I made in 3 months. I sat in a velvet chair, sipping champagne I couldn't appreciate, watching Ashley model dress after dress while her mother and sister offered opinions and advice. When Ashley found the one, a strapless ivory silk gown with intricate beadwork, she spun around in front of the three-way mirror, her face glowing with joy. "Oh, what do you think, Evelyn?" she asked, turning to me. "You look beautiful," I said, and I meant it. She did look beautiful, like a princess in a fairy tale, but I also felt like I was watching my son's future from behind glass, present but not really part of it. Patricia started crying, happy tears, and Ashley's sister started taking pictures, and I realized that this was a moment that belonged to them, not to me. I was Jason's mother, but I wasn't really Ashley's family, not in the way that mattered for moments like this. The wedding was set for June of 2003, just over 2 years after Jason's graduation. As the date got closer, I found myself working extra hours to save money for a mother-of-the-groom dress, for wedding gifts, for all the expenses that seemed to multiply as the big day approached. I wanted to contribute, wanted to feel like I was part of making their dream wedding happen. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Jason came to see me. He sat at our old kitchen table, the same one where he'd done homework as a child, where I'd taught him to play cards, where we'd shared countless meals together, and his face was serious. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something." My heart jumped. Was he getting cold feet? Was something wrong with Ashley? Had I done something to upset them? "What is it, honey?" He looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "It's about the wedding, about the seating arrangements." I waited, not understanding why this would require such a serious conversation. Ashley's family, they're very traditional, very concerned about appearances, and some of their friends. He trailed off, looking anywhere but at me. Jason, what are you trying to tell me?" He took a deep breath. "They want to seat you at the family table, of course, but would you be okay sitting with Ashley's great-aunt Margaret? She's elderly, doesn't really know many people there. They thought you might have things in common." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Things in common? You know, you both live alone. You're both what, Jason?" He looked miserable. "Both not really part of their social circle." I stared at my son across the table that had been the center of our small family for so many years. The boy I'd raised alone, the boy I'd worked 2 jobs to support, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, was asking me to sit at the overflow table at his own wedding so his new family wouldn't have to be uncomfortable. "Of course," I heard myself saying. "Whatever makes things easier." His relief was visible. "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand. You always understand." But I didn't understand. I didn't understand how the woman who'd raised him had become someone to be managed, someone whose presence needed to be carefully planned around to avoid embarrassment. The wedding itself was everything Ashley had dreamed of. The country club was decorated with white roses and baby's breath, the champagne flowed freely, and the photographer captured every perfect moment. I wore a dress I'd found on clearance at Nordstrom Rack, navy blue again, because it was safe and classic and wouldn't stand out in photos. I sat at my assigned table with Margaret Miller Worthington, who was indeed elderly and sweet, and seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my work as a seamstress. She told me about her late husband, her garden, her concerns about her memory starting to slip. We had a pleasant evening together, but the whole time I was acutely aware that I was seated as far from the head table as possible while still technically being at the family reception. During the father-daughter dance, I watched Richard Miller spin Ashley around the dance floor, both of them laughing and clearly comfortable in each other's arms. Then came the mother-son dance, and Jason walked over to my table to escort me to the floor. The band played the way you look tonight," and my son held me gently as we swayed to the music. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered in my ear, "for everything, for making this possible." I wanted to tell him that loving him had been the easiest thing in the world, that watching him grow up had been my greatest joy, that seeing him happy was worth every sacrifice I'd ever made. But the words stuck in my throat, and all I could do was hold him close and try to memorize the feeling of my son in my arms. When the song ended, he kissed my cheek and walked back to his new wife, and I understood with crystal clarity that I was watching the end of something. The chapter of our lives where I was the most important woman in Jason's world had officially closed. The months after the wedding were an adjustment for all of us. Jason and Ashley moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side. Nothing fancy by their standards, but it might as well have been a palace compared to where I lived. I was invited over once for dinner, a carefully choreographed evening where Ashley served takeout from an expensive restaurant on wedding gift china, and we made polite conversation about their jobs, their friends, their plans. Their apartment was everything mine wasn't, bright and modern, with hardwood floors and big windows that let in lots of light. The furniture looked like it came from magazines, all clean lines and neutral colors. There were wedding photos displayed throughout, professional shots that could have been advertisements for the perfect life. I complimented everything enthusiastically, because I wanted them to know I was proud of what they'd built together. But I also felt like I was visiting a museum exhibit about successful young people, not my son's home. Jason called me less frequently after the wedding. Not dramatically less. I don't think he even realized he was doing it. But our weekly Sunday conversations became bi-weekly, then monthly. When we did talk, he'd tell me about work, about weekend trips with Ashley, about restaurants they'd tried and plays they'd seen. His life sounded full and exciting, and very far away from my small apartment in Brooklyn. I started picking up extra work to fill the empty hours. Mrs. Rosenberg had retired by then, and the shop had changed hands twice, but I was skilled enough that I could find steady employment. I also began taking on more complex alterations. Wedding dresses, formal gowns, things that required the kind of detailed handwork that machines couldn't do. One evening in December of 2004, about 18 months after the wedding, Jason called with news that made my heart soar. "Mom, we have something to tell you. Ashley's pregnant." I started crying right there in my kitchen, overwhelmed with joy at the thought of becoming a grandmother. This was it. This was how I'd find my place in their new life. This was how we'd become a real family again. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. How is Ashley feeling? When is the baby due? Do you know if it's a boy or girl?" Jason laughed at my rapid-fire questions. "Slow down, Mom. She's feeling good. The baby's due in July, and we want it to be a surprise. But Mom, we need to ask you something. Anything. Whatever you need." Ashley's been pretty anxious about the whole pregnancy thing, and her mother thinks it would be better if we didn't have too many visitors at first. Keep things calm and quiet while we adjust. I felt that familiar cold sensation in my stomach. What does that mean exactly? Just that maybe you could wait a few weeks after the baby's born before you come to visit. Let us get settled into a routine first. I was quiet for so long that Jason asked if I was still there. "I'm here," I said finally. "Whatever you think is best." But hanging up the phone, I realized that I was being managed again, pushed to the margins of another major moment in my son's life. And this time, it wasn't just about seating arrangements or dinner invitations. This was about my grandchild. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling of my small bedroom, wondering how I'd become someone whose presence in her own family required careful scheduling and advance notice. I thought about all the hours I'd spent at that kitchen table, helping Jason with homework, listening to his dreams and fears, building the foundation of the man he'd become. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being essential and become optional. And the worst part was, I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had happened. Emma Rose Carter was born on July 15th or 2005 at 3:42 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was sitting in my kitchen at 4 a.m., staring at my phone, waiting for Jason to call with news. When he finally did, his voice was thick with exhaustion and wonder. "Mom, she's here. Emma Rose, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She's perfect." I cried hearing those words, imagining my son holding his daughter for the first time, thinking about how his whole world had just changed in the most beautiful way possible. I wanted to rush to the hospital immediately, to see this miracle baby who carried part of me in her DNA. But I remembered Jason's request about waiting. "How's Ashley?" "She's tired but good. Really good." "Mom, I can't believe I'm a father." "You're going to be wonderful at it," I told him, and I meant it, despite everything, despite the distance that had grown between us. I knew that Jason had a good heart. He'd been raised with love, even if he'd forgotten some of that along the way. "I'll call you tomorrow with more details," he said. "Maybe you can come visit next weekend." Next weekend. My granddaughter was hours old, and I was being scheduled in like a maintenance appointment. But I said yes, because what else could I do? That week crawled by like a year. I went to work, came home, tried to keep busy, but all I could think about was Emma. I found myself stopping at baby stores, looking at tiny clothes and soft blankets, imagining what she might look like. Did she have Jason's dark hair? Ashley's delicate features? My husband Robert's gentle eyes? I bought a small yellow outfit, gender neutral, just in case they changed their minds about surprises, and a stuffed rabbit that reminded me of one Jason had loved as a child. I wrapped them carefully, along with a handmade baby blanket I'd been working on for months, stitching it with all the love and hope I had for this new little person. When Saturday finally came, I took 2 subways and a bus to get to their apartment. The Upper East Side felt like a different planet from Brooklyn. Cleaner, quieter, full of people who looked like they belonged in magazine advertisements. I stood outside their building for a few minutes, smoothing my hair and checking my reflection in the glass doors, wanting to make a good impression on my granddaughter. Jason answered the door looking exhausted but happy. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was sticking up in ways that reminded me of when he was little and had just woken up from a nap. "Mom, come in. She's sleeping right now, but you can see her." The apartment felt different than it had during my dinner visit, softer somehow, more lived in. There were baby things everywhere, a bouncy seat in the living room, burp cloths draped over the back of the couch, a diaper bag by the front door. It looked like a home where people actually lived, not just a showplace. Ashley was sitting on the couch, holding a small pink bundle, and when she looked up at me, her face was radiant despite her obvious tiredness. Motherhood had changed her, made her seem more real somehow. "Evelyn, come meet Emma." I approached slowly, my heart pounding, and there she was, the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen. She had a perfect rosebud mouth, tiny fists curled up near her cheeks, and the softest-looking dark hair. She was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that she was meeting her grandmother for the first time. "Can I hold her?" I whispered. Ashley nodded and carefully transferred the baby into my arms. The weight of her was surprising, so light, but so substantial at the same time. She smelled like powder and milk, and something indefinably sweet that must have been just her. When I looked down at her tiny face, she opened her eyes for just a moment. Dark blue, unfocused, but somehow wise, and I fell in love so completely that it took my breath away. "Hello, Emma," I murmured. "I'm your Grandma Evelyn. I've been waiting so long to meet you." She made a small sound, not quite a cry, but a little complaint, and I instinctively began to rock her gently. She settled immediately, and I felt that ancient satisfaction that comes from comforting a baby, from being exactly what they need in that moment. I held her for almost an hour while Jason and Ashley dozed on the couch. It had been so long since I'd held an infant that I'd forgotten how perfect they feel in your arms, how they seem to fit against your chest, like they were made to be there. I talked to her softly, telling her about her daddy when he was little, about the apartment where she was always welcome, about how much I already loved her. When it was time for me to leave, I felt like I was being torn in half. I wanted to stay, to help with night feedings, to rock Emma when she cried, to be useful in this new phase of my family's life. But I could see that Ashley was getting restless, checking the clock, and I knew my visit was supposed to be brief. "Thank you for coming, Mom," Jason said, walking me to the door. "It means a lot. When can I see her again?" "Soon," he said, but his tone was vague. "We're still figuring out our routine. Ashley's mother is coming next weekend to help out for a few days." Of course she was. Patricia would be there to help with the routine while I was relegated to brief, scheduled visits. Over the following months, I saw Emma maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. The visits followed a pattern. I'd call to ask when would be convenient. Jason would check with Ashley, and they'd give me a time slot that worked around their schedule. Usually it was a Saturday afternoon for an hour or 2, long enough to hold the baby and catch up on basic news, but not long enough to feel truly connected to her life. I watched Emma grow and change in snapshots, smiling for the first time, sitting up, starting to crawl. Each milestone felt both precious and painful, because I was experiencing them as an observer rather than as a participant in her daily life. I'd hear about her first solid foods, her first words, her first steps through Jason's phone calls rather than witnessing them myself. Ashley's mother, Patricia, seemed to have no such restrictions on her time with Emma. When I'd arrive for my visits, I'd often hear stories about Grandma Patricia's recent adventures with the baby, trips to the park, shopping excursions, long afternoons spent reading books and playing games. Patricia had retired from her part-time charity work to dedicate more time to being a grandmother, something I couldn't afford to do with my 2 jobs. The inequality stung, but what hurt more was the way it seemed so natural to everyone else. Of course, Patricia would be more involved. She lived closer. She had more time. She and Ashley had that effortless mother-daughter relationship that I'd never managed to build with my daughter-in-law. When Emma was about 8 months old, Jason called me with exciting news. "Mom, we're buying a house." "A house? That's wonderful." "Where?" "Westchester County, Scarsdale. It's got great schools, a big backyard, much more space for Emma to grow up. We found this perfect place. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a real dining room. Ashley's dad helped us with the down payment." Scarsdale. I'd heard of it. Knew it was one of those wealthy suburbs where people moved when they'd really made it in the world. It was also about an hour from my apartment by train, assuming the trains were running on time, and I could afford the fare for regular visits. "That's amazing, honey. I'm so proud of you. We want you to see it before we close. Maybe next Sunday. We could drive you up, show you around, have lunch somewhere nice." I said yes, because I wanted to see where my granddaughter would be growing up, but I already felt the physical distance that would soon match the emotional distance that had been growing for years. The house was beautiful, a colonial with white shutters and a manicured front lawn, the kind of place that shouted successful family lives here. It was in a neighborhood where all the houses looked prosperous and well-maintained, where the cars in the driveways were luxury models, where everything seemed designed to reassure you that you were among people who'd made good choices in life. Ashley walked me through each room, pointing out features and discussing their decorating plans. There was a formal living room that would rarely be used, a family room with a fireplace, a kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Upstairs, Emma would have her own room, not a nursery, but a real bedroom where she could grow from toddler to teenager. "And this," Ashley said, opening the door to the largest bedroom, "will be our master suite. We're going to have a sitting area by the windows, and eventually we'll redo the bathroom with a jacuzzi tub." I made all the appropriate appreciative sounds, but privately I was calculating what this house must have cost and feeling dizzy at the number. Jason was doing well at work, but not this well. Ashley's father's contribution to the down payment must have been substantial. After the tour, we went to lunch at a restaurant in town, one of those places where the menu doesn't list prices and the waiters wear black ties. I ordered the least expensive thing I could find and tried not to think about what this meal cost compared to my weekly grocery budget. "So what do you think, Mom?" Jason asked. "About the house?" "It's beautiful. Emma's going to love growing up there. The schools are supposed to be amazing," Ashley added. "And there's a country club nearby where we're thinking of joining. They have tennis, golf, a pool, great for kids." I nodded and smiled, but inside I was doing math again. Country club memberships, private school tuition, tennis lessons. This was the life they were building for Emma, and it was a life that existed in a completely different economic universe from mine. They moved that fall, when Emma was just over a year old. I helped pack some of Jason's childhood belongings that he'd stored in my apartment, photo albums, some books, a few toys he thought Emma might enjoy someday. As I wrapped his high school trophies in newspaper, I felt like I was packing away the last physical evidence that we'd once been a family of 2, that there had been a time when I was the most important person in his world. The new house made visiting even more complicated. The train from Brooklyn to Scarsdale took over an hour each way, and cost more than I was comfortable spending regularly. Jason offered to come pick me up sometimes, but that meant he had to make a 2-hour round trip just to collect me, and I could tell it was an inconvenience. My visits became less frequent, maybe once a month, sometimes less if the weather was bad or if my work schedule was particularly demanding. I'd spend Saturday afternoon and evening with them, stay overnight in their guest room, which felt like a luxury hotel compared to my apartment, and take the train back Sunday afternoon. Emma was walking now, tottering around their big house on unsteady legs, babbling in the language that only babies speak. She was curious about everything, getting into cabinets, pulling books off shelves, exploring this palace that was her normal world. When I'd visit, she'd be shy with me at first. Not afraid, but uncertain, the way children are with adults they don't see regularly. It broke my heart every time. That moment of hesitation when I'd reach for her and she'd turn to Ashley or Jason for reassurance. I was her grandmother, but I was also a stranger who showed up once a month bearing gifts and then disappeared again. One Sunday evening in November, as Jason was driving me to the train station, he mentioned something casually that stopped my heart. "Oh, by the way, Emma said her first clear word last week. Mama, of course, but really distinctly. Ashley was so excited she called her mother immediately." "That's wonderful," I managed to say. "I'm sorry I missed it." "Well, you know how it is with kids. These things happen when they happen. There'll be plenty more milestones, but that was the problem. There wouldn't be plenty more for me. I was missing them, one by one, because I wasn't part of Emma's daily life. I was a monthly visitor, a peripheral figure who brought presents and then left. That winter, the visits became even more sporadic. Jason and Ashley were busy with their new life. Ashley had started taking art classes. Jason was working longer hours. Emma was enrolled in a toddler music program and swim lessons. Their calendar was full of activities and social obligations that didn't include me. I started working more hours to fill the empty time and to save money for Emma's future. I had vague ideas about contributing to her college fund, maybe helping with ballet lessons or summer camps when she got older. I wanted to be useful to her, even if I couldn't be present. By the time Emma was 18 months old, I realized that I'd become exactly what I'd feared. The grandmother who lived far away and sent birthday cards. I loved her desperately. But love without proximity, without daily involvement, felt increasingly hollow. I was losing my granddaughter the same way I'd lost my son. Gradually, politely, with everyone insisting that nothing had really changed, even as everything changed completely. The worst part was that I could see the future stretching out ahead of us. Emma growing up thinking of me as a nice lady who visited sometimes, calling Patricia Grandma, and me, Grandma Evelyn, to distinguish between the grandmother who mattered and the one who didn't. I was 63 years old, and I was disappearing from my own family's life one missed milestone at a time. The years that followed Emma's toddlerhood blurred together in my memory, like pages in a book I was only allowed to flip through occasionally. I watched my granddaughter grow up in fragments, Christmas visits, birthday parties, the rare weekend when I was invited to their increasingly elaborate life in Scarsdale. By the time Emma turned 3, she was a confident, articulate little girl who spoke in complete sentences and had opinions about everything. She loved books, just like her father had at that age, and she could spend hours absorbed in picture books, making up stories for the characters. When I'd visit, she'd sometimes bring me a book and climb onto my lap, and those moments felt like pure gold. My granddaughter's warm weight against my chest, her little finger pointing at pictures as she narrated elaborate tales. But these moments were becoming rarer. Emma was busy with preschool, dance classes, play dates with children whose mothers Ashley had befriended at the country club. Their life had a rhythm and structure that revolved around activities I couldn't afford, and social circles I'd never be invited to join. Ashley had changed too, grown into her role as a Scarsdale mother with the same determination she'd once applied to her art history studies. She served on the preschool board, organized charity fundraisers, and always seemed to be rushing from one important commitment to another. When I'd call to arrange visits, she'd consult what sounded like a very complicated calendar, penciling me in between Emma's swimming lessons and dinner parties. "How about the Saturday after next?" she'd say. "We could do lunch, but I should mention that Emma has a birthday party that afternoon, so we'd need to keep it brief." Brief. That word started appearing more frequently in our conversations. Brief visits, brief phone calls, brief updates on Emma's life. Everything about my relationship with my granddaughter was being compressed into smaller and smaller spaces. Jason seemed oblivious to this gradual marginalization, or maybe he was willfully blind to it. When we talked, he'd tell me about Emma's achievements. She was reading early, showing artistic talent, making friends easily, with the pride of a devoted father. But he rarely thought to invite me to witness these achievements firsthand. "You should see her at her ballet recital," he'd say. "She's incredible for a 4-year-old. "When is it?" I'd ask. "Maybe I could come watch." There would be a pause. "Oh, it's next Saturday afternoon, but it's pretty small, just family, and we already promised our tickets to Ashley's parents and her sister. Maybe next time." Next time never seemed to come. I started keeping a journal during these years, not because I intended to write a book or anything dramatic like that, but because I needed somewhere to put all the feelings that had nowhere else to go. I'd write about Emma's phone calls to me, brief conversations where she'd tell me about her day in the enthusiastic way small children do, chattering about friends and teachers and the cat that lived in their backyard. Grandma Evelyn, I lost a tooth, she announced during one call when she was 6. You did? That's so exciting. Did the tooth fairy come? Yes. She left me $5. Grandma Patricia says I should save it for something special. Grandma Patricia, always there with advice, always part of the important moments. I'd learned not to ask what she thought I should do with my tooth fairy money, because that question never came. The financial disparity between my life and theirs was becoming more pronounced with each passing year. Jason's career was flourishing. He'd been promoted twice, and was now some kind of senior analyst, earning what seemed to me like an enormous salary. They'd renovated their kitchen, joined the country club, started talking about adding a pool to their backyard. Meanwhile, I was still living in the same small apartment in Brooklyn, still working as a seamstress, though my hands were starting to ache more at the end of long days. I'd developed arthritis in my fingers, and some of the more delicate work was becoming difficult. I was past retirement age but couldn't afford to stop working, not if I wanted to maintain even my current modest lifestyle. When Emma turned 7, they threw her a birthday party at the country club. I was invited, of course. A 2-hour train ride to spend 3 hours at a party where I knew no one except the birthday girl and her parents. The party was elaborate, with a professional entertainer, a cake that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and goodie bags that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I brought Emma a set of chapter books I'd carefully selected, stories I thought she'd enjoy as she became a more confident reader. I watched her open my gift among a pile of presents from Pottery Barn Kids and American Girl, and I could see her trying to look enthusiastic about books when she'd already unwrapped an electronic tablet and a bicycle. "Thank you, Grandma Evelyn," she said politely, giving me a quick hug before moving on to the next gift. Polite. That's what our relationship had become. Polite and careful. Like I was a distant relative rather than her grandmother. The other adults at the party were friendly enough, but I felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. They talked about private schools and summer houses, vacation plans to Europe, and college prep strategies for their elementary-aged children. I smiled and nodded and tried to contribute when I could, but mostly I felt like I was observing a world I'd never be part of. Ashley's mother, Patricia, held court near the gift table, clearly in her element among these well-dressed women. She'd aged gracefully, her silver hair perfectly styled, her clothes expensive but understated. When she introduced me to other guests, it was always with a kind smile that somehow managed to convey that I was Jason's mother, but not really part of their inner circle. "This is Evelyn, Jason's mother," she'd say. "She lives in Brooklyn." The way she said Brooklyn made it sound like a foreign country, somewhere quaint and distant where interesting people lived but wouldn't fit in at a Westchester country club. After the party, Jason walked me to my car. I'd splurged on a taxi to the train station because I was carrying Emma's leftover cake and didn't want to manage it on public transportation. "Thanks for coming, Mom. It means a lot to Emma to have you here." I wanted to ask him if it really did mean a lot to Emma, because from where I sat, it seemed like she barely noticed I was there. But I didn't want to sound bitter or ungrateful, so I just smiled and said it was wonderful to celebrate with her. "We should have you over for dinner soon," Jason added. "Maybe next month when things calm down a bit." But things never seemed to calm down in their household. There was always another activity, another commitment, another reason why visits needed to be brief or postponed. I started to suspect that their busy schedule wasn't accidental, that it was easier to maintain distance when you could always point to legitimate reasons why closeness wasn't practical. By the time Emma was 8, I was seeing her maybe 6 times a year: Christmas, her birthday, Easter if I was lucky, and a few scattered visits when schedules aligned. Each time, I was struck by how much she'd grown and changed, how many small developments I'd missed. She'd lost more teeth, learned to ride her bike without training wheels, made new friends whose names I didn't recognize. I tried to stay current with her interests by asking detailed questions during our brief phone calls, but it felt forced, like I was conducting an interview rather than having a conversation with my granddaughter. How was school today, sweetheart?" "Good. We're reading about the Revolutionary War. It's kind of boring." "That sounds interesting to me. Are you learning about any particular battles?" "I don't remember. Grandma Patricia is taking me to a museum about it this weekend. She knows lots about history." Of course she did. Patricia seemed to know lots about everything that mattered to Emma's education and development. I was left asking generic grandmother questions while Patricia was actively engaged in enriching Emma's mind. The pattern continued as Emma got older. Patricia was the one who went to school plays and parent-teacher conferences. Patricia was the one who helped with school projects and took Emma to cultural events. Patricia was the grandmother who mattered, who was present, who had earned the right to be called simply Grandma, without any qualifying first name. I was 68 years old and watching my family's life from the outside, like someone looking through windows at a warm, well-lit house where everyone was happy and busy and complete without me. The breaking point came in December of 2017, when Emma was 12 years old. I'd been invited to Christmas dinner, my annual appearance at their holiday table. The invitation had come with the usual careful specifications. Dinner at 2 o'clock, casual dress. Could I bring dessert from that bakery in Brooklyn they'd liked last year? I'd spent days planning for this visit. I'd bought Emma a beautiful sweater I'd seen in a shop window, not from a discount store, but from a real boutique, because I wanted to give her something special. I'd also made her a photo album of pictures from Jason's childhood, thinking she might enjoy seeing her father as a little boy. I'd worked extra hours for 2 weeks to afford the train fare, the gifts, and the bakery dessert that was expected of me. The house looked magnificent that December afternoon. Ashley had decorated with the kind of sophisticated Christmas elegance that looked effortless, but probably took weeks to plan. There were garlands on the mantelpiece, a perfectly proportioned tree in the living room, and the dining room table was set with china that cost more than my monthly rent. Emma was beautiful at 12, tall for her age, with Jason's dark hair and Ashley's delicate features. She'd grown into her face, lost the last traces of little girl roundness, and was beginning to look like the young woman she'd become. When I arrived, she hugged me dutifully and thanked me for the gifts, but I could tell her mind was elsewhere. Emma's been so busy with school, Ashley explained as we settled in the living room with drinks. She's taking advanced classes, and she's on the debate team. Plus, she's been doing volunteer work at the animal shelter with my mother, with Patricia. Of course. That sounds wonderful, I said. Maybe I could come watch one of your debates sometime, on Emma. Emma looked to her mother, a quick glance I almost missed. They're usually during school hours, Ashley answered for her, and some of them are away matches, pretty far from the city, too far for Grandma Evelyn to attend. In other words, dinner was delicious. Ashley had clearly spent considerable time and money preparing a feast. There was roast beef, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans, almondine, fresh rolls, a salad with ingredients I didn't recognize. Everything was served on the good china with cloth napkins and real silver. I tried to contribute to the conversation, asking about Emma's school, Jason's work, their plans for the upcoming year, but I felt like I was working too hard, like I was a guest trying to be charming rather than a family member simply being present. It was during dessert, the expensive bakery cake I'd brought, served with coffee from beans that probably cost more per pound than I spent on food in a week, that Ashley made the comment that changed everything. We'd been discussing Emma's summer plans. She was old enough now to attend sleepaway camp, and they'd found an exclusive program in Vermont where she'd study theater and writing. It sounds amazing, I said to Emma. You'll have to write me letters about all your adventures. Actually, Ashley said, cutting a precise piece of cake, the camp has a no outside contact policy for the first 2 weeks. They want the kids to really immerse themselves in the experience without distractions from home. Distractions from home. The word stung, but I tried not to show it. Of course, Patricia will be helping her pack and get ready, Ashley continued. She's so good with these kinds of logistics. I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly gone. I'd be happy to help too, if you need anything. There was that pause again, that moment of silent communication between Ashley and Jason that excluded me completely. That's sweet of you, Evelyn, Ashley said finally, her tone suggesting that my offer was touching but impractical. But we've got it covered. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and careful smiles. When it was time for me to leave, Jason drove me to the train station, and we sat in his expensive car making small talk while we waited for my train to arrive. Thanks for coming, Mom. Emma always loves seeing you. I looked at my son, my successful, polished son, who lived in a beautiful house with his beautiful family, and realized that he genuinely believed what he was saying. In his mind, everything was fine. I was his mother. Emma was his daughter. We were all family. and the fact that I was increasingly peripheral to their actual lives was just the natural order of things. Jason, I said carefully, do you think maybe I could be more involved in Emma's life? Maybe come to some of her school events or help out occasionally? He looked uncomfortable. Mom, you know how busy things get, and the drive is really far for you. Plus, Emma's schedule is pretty packed with activities. I could take the train. I could work around her schedule. It's not just about logistics, he said, and I could hear Ashley's voice in his words. Emma's at an age where she's focused on her friends and her activities. She's not really into spending time with extended family right now. Extended family. That's what I'd become. Extended, peripheral, optional. My train arrived then, and Jason helped me carry my things to the platform. He kissed my cheek and told me to call soon, and I rode back to Brooklyn in a car full of strangers, staring out the window at the dark suburbs sliding past, and finally understanding that I'd lost the war for my own family's attention. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later, on another December night when Ashley would say words that cut deeper than any I'd heard before. But sitting on that train, I was just sad, deeply, bone-weary sad about the woman I'd become in my son's life and the grandmother I'd never been allowed to be in Emma's. I was 68 years old, and I'd spent the last 12 years being politely, systematically erased from my own family's story. December 23rd, 2023. I remember that date like it's burned into my memory, because it was the night I stopped being polite and started being honest. It was the night I discovered that sometimes the people who love you the most are the ones who need to hear the truth the most, even when, especially when, that truth is uncomfortable. Emma was 18 then, a senior in high school, beautiful and confident in the way that young women are when they've grown up with every advantage. She'd been accepted to Columbia University for the following fall, early admission, which had caused great celebration in the family. I'd heard about it through Jason's phone call, of course, not from Emma herself, though she did send me a polite text message saying, "Thank you for the congratulations card." The congratulations card. As if my granddaughter's acceptance to an Ivy League university warranted the same response as a distant acquaintance's birthday, but I'd been invited to Christmas dinner again, the annual reminder that I still technically belonged to this family, even if my role had been reduced to that of an occasional visitor who brought expensive bakery desserts and asked careful questions about everyone's lives. The invitation had come with familiar restrictions. Arrive at 3, casual dress. Could I bring dessert from Zaber's this time instead of the Brooklyn Bakery? I'd agreed to everything, as I always did, and spent my limited savings on train fare, gifts, and the requested dessert. I'd bought Emma a beautiful leather portfolio for college, the kind of thing she'd need for interviews and presentations, expensive but practical. For Ashley, I'd chosen a silk scarf I'd seen her admire in a magazine. For Jason, a book about financial planning that I thought might interest him. Small gifts, carefully chosen, that wouldn't seem inadequate next to whatever Patricia had surely spent considerably more on. The December weather that day was brutal, one of those bone-chilling days when the wind cuts through your coat and makes you question why anyone chooses to live in the Northeast. I'd wrapped myself in my warmest clothes and made the long journey from Brooklyn to Scarsdale, carrying my packages and the Zabar's cake box, feeling like a supplicant bringing offerings to a shrine. The house looked even more magnificent than usual, decorated for Christmas with the kind of sophisticated elegance that appeared in home decorating magazines. There were white lights woven through garlands, a massive wreath on the front door, and through the windows I could see the perfectly proportioned Christmas tree that dominated their living room. Ashley answered the door, looking stunning in a cream-colored cashmere dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She was 53 now, but maintained the kind of ageless beauty that comes from regular spa treatments, personal trainers, and the absence of financial stress. Her smile was warm and genuine as she welcomed me in from the cold. "Evelyn, come in. You must be freezing. Here, let me take your coat." The house was warm and filled with the sense of an elaborate meal in preparation. I could hear Jason's voice from the kitchen, talking to someone on the phone about work. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers, and everything felt carefully orchestrated to create the perfect holiday atmosphere. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, and I caught my breath at how grown-up she looked. She was wearing a burgundy dress that flattered her tall, elegant frame, and her dark hair was styled in a sophisticated updo that made her look more like a young woman than the little girl I still sometimes saw in my mind. She came down the stairs with the confident grace of someone who'd grown up in this beautiful house, who'd never doubted her place in the world. "Hi, Grandma Evelyn," she said, giving me a brief hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "How was your trip?" "Fine, sweetheart. You look beautiful." Very grown up. She smiled politely and murmured thanks, but I could see her attention was already moving past me, toward whatever more interesting activity I'd interrupted by arriving. "Grandma Patricia is in the kitchen with Dad," Ashley said, taking my packages. "She's been here all afternoon helping with dinner preparations." Of course she had. Patricia at 75 was still the active, involved grandmother, the one who helped with meal preparation and knew Emma's college plans in detail, who would probably help her move into her dorm room in the fall, while I learned about it through phone calls and holiday cards. I followed Ashley into the kitchen, where Patricia was indeed helping Jason with what appeared to be an elaborate prime rib dinner. She looked elegant, even in an apron, her silver hair perfectly styled, her makeup still fresh despite hours of cooking. When she saw me, her smile was pleasant but distant, the way you might greet a neighbor you recognize but don't really know well. "Evelyn, how nice to see you. How are you managing the winter weather?" Managing the winter weather, as if I were elderly and frail, struggling with the basic challenges of seasonal existence rather than simply cold from the long trip to see my family. "I'm doing fine, Patricia. Thank you for asking." Jason looked up from the stove, where he was monitoring what appeared to be several complicated dishes simultaneously. He was 46 now, successful and confident, wearing the kind of casual clothes that looked effortless, but probably cost more than I spent on clothing in a year. "Mom, I'm glad you made it safely. The weather's supposed to get worse tonight." I accepted a glass of wine and tried to find my place in the kitchen conversation, which seemed to revolve around Emma's college plans, Patricia's recent trip to visit Ashley's sister in California, and the various activities that filled their busy social calendar. I contributed when I could, asked interested questions, and tried not to notice how natural Patricia seemed in this kitchen, while I felt like a visitor in my own family's home. Dinner was served in their formal dining room, the table set with china that reflected the light from their crystal chandelier. Everything was perfect. The food, the wine, the conversation, the way the candlelight made everyone look warm and happy. It was the kind of scene that would make a beautiful photograph for their holiday cards. I sat in my assigned seat, not at either end of the table, but along the side, positioned where I could participate in conversation without being central to it. Emma sat across from me, Patricia next to her, Ashley and Jason at either end like the host and hostess they'd become. The conversation flowed around topics I could contribute to but not lead. Emma's college plans. Patricia had visited Columbia with her and knew all the details about housing options and course requirements. Jason's work. He'd received another promotion and was considering a job offer from a firm in Manhattan. Ashley's latest charitable committee work. She was organizing a fundraiser for the local hospital. I listened and smiled and asked appropriate questions, feeling like I was performing the role of interested family member rather than actually being one. When Emma talked about her plans to study international relations, I wanted to tell her about the books on world politics I'd been reading, about the articles I'd saved that I thought might interest her, but somehow the conversation never paused long enough for me to contribute anything substantial. It was during dessert, the Zabar's cake I'd brought, served alongside Patricia's homemade chocolate truffles, that the moment came that changed everything. Emma was describing her plans for a gap-year trip to Europe, that Patricia was apparently helping to plan and partially fund. I listened to the details about museums in Paris, historical sites in Rome, language immersion programs in Spain, feeling proud of my granddaughter's ambitions, and also aware that this was another major life experience I'd learn about after the fact. "It sounds wonderful, Emma," I said when she paused. "I'd love to hear all about it when you get back. Maybe you could show me your photos." There was that familiar pause, that moment of silent communication between Ashley and Emma that had become so common over the years. "Of course," Emma said politely. "I'm sure I'll have lots of stories. Maybe I could take you to lunch when you get back," I continued, encouraged by her response. "Oh, we could go somewhere nice, and you could tell me about your adventures." Ashley set down her coffee cup with the kind of careful precision that suggested she was choosing her words carefully. "Evelyn, that's very sweet of you, but Emma's going to be quite busy when she returns. She'll need to prepare for college, spend time with her friends before they all leave for school. Her schedule is going to be packed." "I understand. I just thought, the thing is," Ashley continued, her voice gentle but firm, "Emma's at a stage in her life where she's focused on moving forward, on building her adult relationships. She doesn't really have time for— She paused, searching for the right words. Time for what? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew what was coming. Ashley glanced at Jason, then back at me. Time for family obligations that don't really fit into her current priorities. Family obligations. That's what I'd become. Not a beloved grandmother, but an obligation that needed to be managed and minimized. I see, I said quietly. It's not personal, Patricia added, her tone suggesting that she was being helpful rather than hurtful. Young people today are just so busy, so focused on their goals. It's different from when we were raising children. When we were raising children. The casual plural that excluded me completely, that grouped Patricia with Ashley as the real mothers and grandmothers in this family while I remained the outsider. I looked around the table at these people I loved, these people I'd sacrificed for, these people who had just casually informed me that my granddaughter didn't have time for me in her life. Jason was avoiding eye contact, focusing intently on his dessert. Emma looked uncomfortable but not surprised. Clearly, this conversation had been planned, perhaps even rehearsed. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The polite, accommodating woman who had spent years accepting whatever scraps of attention were offered to her, who had smiled and said, "Of course," and "I understand," to every limitation placed on her relationship with her own family. That woman finally got tired of being small. "Ashley," I said, and something in my voice must have been different because everyone looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think I don't belong in this house?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Ashley's face went pale, and Jason finally looked directly at me. "Mom, what do you mean?" "I mean," I said, keeping my voice steady, "that I've been coming to this house for 15 years, and I've never once felt like I belonged here. I've felt like a guest who was invited out of obligation, someone whose presence was tolerated but not welcomed." "That's not true," Ashley said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk, Ashley? When was the last time Emma called me to share something important? When was the last time I was invited to anything that wasn't a major holiday or birthday?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Emma was staring at her plate. Patricia looked shocked. Jason appeared to be struggling with what to say. "I think maybe we should—" Jason began. "No," I said firmly. "I think we should finish this conversation, because I've been quiet about it for years, and I'm tired of being quiet." I turned to Emma, my beautiful granddaughter who was about to leave for college, who would probably get married someday and have children of her own, who might understand this conversation differently when she was older. "Emma, sweetheart, I want you to know something. I have loved you every single day of your life. I have thought about you when I wake up in the morning and when I go to sleep at night. I have worked extra hours to save money for your future, even though no one asked me to. I have kept every school photo, every drawing you made when you were little, every report card Jason shared with me." Emma looked up at me then, and I could see surprise in her eyes, as if she'd never considered that I had an emotional life that revolved around her. "I know I don't fit into your world," I continued. "I know my apartment is small and my clothes aren't expensive, and I can't contribute to your college fund or your European adventures. I know Patricia is more fun to be with, more sophisticated, better able to give you the kind of experiences you're used to having." Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, but I wasn't finished. "But I am your grandmother too. I am the woman who raised your father, who worked 2 jobs to send him to college, who sacrificed everything I had to give him the foundation that led to this life you're all living. And I am tired of being treated like I'm somehow less important because I have less money." "Evelyn," Ashley said, her voice sharp now, "I think you're being unfair." "Am I? Then tell me, Ashley, when was the last time you asked for my opinion about something important in Emma's life? When was the last time you included me in a decision about her future? When was the last time you treated me like I had something valuable to contribute to her upbringing?" Ashley's face was flushed now, and I could see anger building in her eyes. "You want honesty, Evelyn? Fine. The truth is that Emma has moved beyond needing the kind of simple affection you offer. She needs guidance from people who understand her world, who can help her navigate the complexities of the life she's building. She needs sophistication, not just love." The words hit me like physical blows, but I didn't flinch. "I see. And you don't think I'm sophisticated enough to contribute to her life. I think," Ashley said, her composure cracking, "that you need to understand that this family has evolved beyond your limited perspective. Emma is going to Columbia. She's going to travel the world. She's going to build a career and marry someone from her social circle. and have children who will grow up with advantages you can't even imagine. That's her reality. And where do I fit into that reality? Ashley's pause was all the answer I needed. You don't, she said finally. Not really. You belong to Jason's past, not Emma's future. And I think it would be better for everyone if you could accept that. The dining room fell completely silent. Even the classical music seemed to have stopped, though that might have been my imagination. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 30 years of careful politeness crumbling around me. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking only slightly as I placed my napkin beside my plate. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you for finally saying what you've clearly been thinking for years. I turned to Jason, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Jason, I want you to know that I don't blame you for this. You married a woman who gave you the life you dreamed of, and that's what parents want for their children. But I need you to understand something. I raised you to be kind, to be loyal, to remember where you came from. And somewhere along the way, you forgot those lessons. Jason opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. Emma, sweetheart, I want you to remember this conversation someday. Maybe when you're my age and wondering about your place in your own children's lives. Your mother thinks I belong to your father's past, but she's wrong. I belong to your future too, because the strength and determination that got your father out of that small apartment in Brooklyn, that lives in you too. And someday, you're going to need that strength. I looked around the table one more time, at the perfect Christmas dinner in the perfect dining room of the perfect house that had never felt like home to me. I'm going to leave now. Patricia, thank you for making it clear where everyone stands. Ashley, I hope Emma grows up to treat you better than you've treated me. Jason, I love you, but I'm disappointed in the man you've become. And Emma, my darling girl, I hope someday you'll call me because you want to, not because someone tells you it's your obligation. I walked out of that dining room with my head held high, collected my coat from the front closet, and stepped out into the December night. Jason followed me outside, his face stricken. Mom, wait, let me drive you to the station. No, thank you. I'll call a taxi. Please, we need to talk about this. I turned to face my son in the cold night air, snow beginning to fall around us like something from a movie. Jason, for 46 years, I have been available whenever you needed me. I have been patient and understanding and accommodating. I have made myself smaller and smaller to fit into the life you built with Ashley. But I am done shrinking. I never asked you to shrink. You didn't have to ask. It was the price of admission to your world, and I paid it gladly because I loved you. But your wife just made it clear that no amount of shrinking will ever make me acceptable to this family. So I'm done trying. The taxi arrived then, summoned by some miracle of urban logistics, and I got into the back seat without looking back at Jason standing in his perfect doorway, framed by the warm light of his perfect house. During the long ride back to Brooklyn, I cried for the grandmother I'd wanted to be, and the relationship with Emma that I'd never been allowed to have. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of speaking my truth, of refusing to accept unacceptable treatment, of remembering that I had value even if the people I loved couldn't see it. I was 71 years old, and I had finally learned the difference between being loved and being respected, and I had decided that respect might be more important than peace. 3 days later, Emma called me. Grandma Evelyn, it's Emma. I wanted to talk to you about Christmas dinner. I sat in my small kitchen, holding my phone, hardly daring to breathe. I'm listening, sweetheart. I don't think what Mom said was right, about you not belonging to my future. I think I'd like to have lunch with you sometime, if the offer still stands. I closed my eyes and smiled, feeling something like hope bloom in my chest. The offer stands, Emma. It always stands. Good, because I realized something after you left. I don't know very much about you, about who you really are, and I think maybe I'd like to. That lunch happened 2 weeks later, at a small restaurant in Manhattan that was neutral territory for both of us. Emma asked me about my childhood, about meeting her grandfather, about the years when I was raising Jason alone. She listened with the kind of attention I hadn't received from anyone in my family in years. Were you scared? She asked. Raising Dad by yourself? Terrified? I admitted. Every single day. But fear doesn't stop you from doing what needs to be done. Is that why you spoke up at Christmas? Because something needed to be done? I considered her question carefully. I spoke up because I realized that teaching you to accept disrespect isn't love, it's harm. And I love you too much to model that kind of acceptance. Emma nodded, looking older than her 18 years. Mom's been upset since Christmas. She says you embarrassed the family. And what do you think? I think you told the truth, and I think maybe the family needed to hear it. We stayed at that restaurant for 3 hours, talking about everything and nothing, building the kind of relationship I dreamed of having with my granddaughter for 18 years. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't going to erase the years of distance, but it was real in a way that our previous interactions had never been. As Emma prepared to leave for college, she asked me to help her shop for dorm supplies. Not Patricia, not Ashley, me. We spent an afternoon at Bed Bath & Beyond, debating thread counts and desk organizers, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was contributing something meaningful to her life. Jason and Ashley didn't speak to me for months after that Christmas dinner, but Emma and I developed a relationship that existed independently of their approval, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation and politeness. And I learned something important at 71 years old. Sometimes the people who love you need you to be strong more than they need you to be agreeable. Sometimes standing up for yourself is the most loving thing you can do, even when it's the hardest thing you've ever done. That December night when I found my voice wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I refused to disappear from my own life, one where I insisted on being seen and valued for who I was, rather than apologizing for who I wasn't. And it all started with refusing to accept that I didn't belong in a house that my sacrifices had helped to build, in a family that my love had helped to create. Sometimes the most important word you can learn to say is no, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is remember that you deserve better than what you've been accepting. I was Evelyn Carter. I was 71 years old, and I had finally learned that love without respect isn't really love at all. It's just beautiful slavery. And I was done being a slave to other people's comfort with my insignificance.